I think we can all agree that the final arc of Bleach features a massive cast of characters. However, this is actually one of the things I really enjoy about the final arc. I think Kubo does a mostly successful job of drawing characters from all corners of the Bleach universe and bringing them together for one big final hurrah for the series. Now, invariably, when you have this many characters, it does mean that sharing the spotlight is going to be tricky. And while I think Kubo does a decent job of trying to give everyone's favourites at least a bit of a chance to shine, it does mean that some characters will be treated invariably better than others. December is upon us and the end of 2020 is near, so I thought now was a great time to do a sequel to a video that I did right back at the start of the year, where we looked at the top 10 losers of the 1000-Year Blood War arc. And while losers might sound like a harsh term, losers and winners doesn't actually refer to my favourite and least favourite characters, but actually characters I believe Kubo treated well in the 1000-Year Blood War arc, and those that weren't treated so well. And when I say treated well, I mean characters that had a good amount of screen time, an impactful role on the story, character development, and just everything that came together to give them good closure at the end of the series. And so in this video we're going to look at the inverse of that one and look at the top 10 winners of the 1000-Year Blood War arc and the characters I believe Kubo treated the best in Bleach's finale. As with the last video, we're only going to be including characters that appeared in previous arcs of Bleach's story. We're going to actually do a separate video at some point looking at the best new characters in the 1000-Year Blood War arc, but in this one I want to look at characters who existed before that so we can see how far they've come right towards the end of Bleach's story and see exactly what the final arc did for them as characters. And of course, before we kickstart things, guys, if you haven't subscribed yet already, we are closing in on 40,000 subs. To hit that number by the end of the year would be phenomenal. So if you love Bleach, you're in the perfect place for weekly videos just like this one. Hit that sub button now. Also, don't forget to give us a thumbs up because it really does help with the YouTube algorithm, and stay up to date with all of my videos by hitting the notification bell. Now, I have a list of 10 characters here that I believe to be the top 10 winners of the 1000-Year Blood War arc, but I also want to begin with an honourable mention. Now, I think the honourable mention might already be a controversial pick, but I actually did not know where to place this guy, and I think many of you would have been expecting him on the list and considerably higher up than this, but it's actually the current captain of the 10th Division, Toshiro Hitsugaya. Being one of, if not Bleach's most popular character, you would definitely expect Hitsugaya to have a big role to play in the final arc, and he definitely does. However, I do believe that proportionately his role in this arc is definitely diminished in comparison to his role in the Arrancar arc, particularly the earlier story segments. Here, Toshiro definitely plays more of a supporting role, but compared to the rest of the captains, he does still get a pretty sizable amount of screen time. And he actually undergoes some pretty nice changes too. He loses his Bankai at the very start of the arc, so he has to change the way he approaches his Zanpakuto and he approaches sword fighting. He gets a win over Kangdu, and then he eventually becomes a pretty badass zombie, who is probably the coolest we've ever seen him, before revealing his brand new adult Toshiro form at the very end of the series. As you would expect from Hitsugaya, he does show up a lot in this arc. So why is he not further up the list of winners, a place that you would expect maybe to be guaranteed for the most popular character? Well, in my opinion, I don't think Kubo could decide what really to do with Hitsugaya in this arc. I think he wanted him to show up a lot, but every time he does, Hitsugaya gets really seriously dunked on. Of course, he's one of the captains to lose his Bankai at the beginning, then he gets absolutely destroyed by Bazby at the start of the second invasion. It really is an utter beatdown. He then manages to narrowly grab a win against Kangdu, but it causes him to completely collapse, at which point he's able to be taken as Giselle's zombified slave. After that, he goes missing for a massive stretch of chapters, about 50 of them altogether, before reappearing at the very final battle, where we do get to see his pretty cool adult Toshiro form, which of course is very powerful, but much like Kenpachi's Bankai, it's barely seen, and the effects of it aren't really felt either, as Gerard is just so overpowering. That being said, Hitsugaya I think deserves his place as an honourable mention. Kubo's decisions with this character throughout this arc are a bit weird, and his role definitely feels diminished in comparison to the Arrancar arc, but he is still in it a lot compared to a lot of characters. I like his approach to losing his Bankai at the start of the arc and how it makes him change his way of thinking, and of course his power-ups are cool, and his zombified form is also pretty badass. Kicking off the list proper at number 10 is the main character, Ichigo Kurosaki. Now, I get what you're thinking, Tom, you put Ichigo at number 1 on the losers list, and yeah, I did, but you have to remember, it is all relative. Being the main character, you would expect Ichigo to get a lot of screen time and have a big role in the final arc, and because he doesn't, that makes him the number 1 loser in my eyes, because he really doesn't get to do anywhere near what you would expect from a main character. But that doesn't mean that the arc was a total train wreck for him, and actually what Ichigo does get to do in the final arc is not only pretty badass, but pretty transformative for his character as well, which is how he manages to just about sneak onto this list. Ichigo and the reader get answers to long-standing questions about his heritage and his powers. He becomes a true Shinigami and gets his own true Zanpakuto, which is actually dual-wielded, which is really cool. And of course, Ichigo himself has his fair share of really badass moments. He's actually treated with a level of reverence in this arc, which I think is fitting for a character who saved the Soul Society from a world-ending threat in the Arrancar arc, and I love the way he is handled in those instances. I also think his power level is pretty accurately portrayed at the start of the arc when he's able to easily overpower Kurge OP, showing that Ichigo is already on a level beyond the Sternritter, and I think his reputation precedes him in this arc. He does cool things like saving Kenpachi and absolutely demolishing 4 Sternritters at once, even coolly taking on 8 at a time, which is also really badass. And then of course he does deal the final blow on Yhwach. Now, I think Ichigo absolutely should have been in the arc more than he was, and he definitely doesn't get a fight to rival the ultimate battles that he has against Byakuya and Ulquiorra, which I think does bring it down in some people's eyes, myself included, but there's no denying that what Ichigo does get to do in this arc is pretty cool. And number 9 on our list is Rukia Kuchiki, formerly the vice-captain of the 13th Division turned captain by the end of the series. And it really is that journey for Rukia, who I think many, including myself, have always seen as a bit of an underdog that makes her time in the Thousand Year Blood War arc so impactful. Now, Rukia, obviously, when she gets her powers back in the Arrancar arc, is an unseated officer, and this is, of course, due to Byakuya trying to hold her back, but like I said, she does feel like an underdog in many respects. And of all of Ichigo's friends, his close friend group, I think she truly does change, transform, and grow the most by the time the end of the series comes around. In the Thousand Year Blood War arc specifically, she takes an active role in the battle, going to the Royal Palace, returning with not only a power-up, but some pretty awesome clothes as well, and defeats Asnot, a major Sternritter who also nearly killed her brother Byakuya at the start of the arc. And this is such a huge moment for a character like Rukia. She uses her amazingly designed and well-deserved Bankai, Haka no Togame, to finish the job, and it truly is Kubo's design work at its peak. And Rukia goes on to maintain this strong, stable nature throughout the rest of the arc until eventually she is given a position of captain at the very end in place of Ukitake. And again, I think it's well deserved. And I think Rukia really does go from feeling like an underdog member of Ichigo's friends to really showcasing her worth in the Thousand Year Blood War. And yeah, of course, Renji undergoes a similar transformation and also beats up Master Masculine, but I think it's more impactful with Rukia. As always, she has been, for the longest time, the female lead of the series, and to see her undergo this growth from unseated to vice captain to captain and gaining that Bankai and defeating a terrifying foe, I think the Thousand Year Blood War arc is good to her. Number 8 on this list is another character who also featured on the top 10 losers list, and that is the captain, or shall I say the former captain of the 7th Division, Seijin Komamura. Now, of all the captains to lose their Bankai, Komamura is the one who gets by far the most interesting subplot, and that's the main reason he's on this list. And it's also the main reason he's on the losers list as well. Kubo does very cool things with Komamura in the Thousand Year Blood War arc, but for whatever reason he decides to just cut the character's story incredibly short in comparison to most other captain level characters. It's a real shame as well, because Komamura going away, finding his secretive great-grandfather and learning about his clan and the humanization technique, which is just so cool in that he literally rips out his heart to obtain immortality. I remember audibly gasping when I saw that he had become a human when I read that chapter weekly. And Kubo just does really cool things with this character, with the themes of revenge and succumbing to that revenge and what it means to be a man. And Komamura's line, "When I stepped foot on this battle, I had left my life behind," remains one of my favourite quotes to this day. So that's the reason he's on here. He gets a much better subplot than any of the other captains that lose their Bankai, and Kubo treats him with a great deal of respect until he decides not to, and Komamura is basically cut from the story. And it is a big shame that Komamura undergoes all of that immense transformation just to defeat a relatively mid-tier Sternritter. It's a bit of a shame, but regardless, it's so badass and just so well done for the most part that he also deserves to be on this list. Now, I think number 7 is truly unexpected, and I don't reckon anyone would have predicted he would have made it onto this list, but it is now the current vice-captain of the 12th Division, Akon. Akon is one of these characters who truly was a tertiary, mostly background character at best, all the way through Bleach until right this moment. And for whatever reason, Kubo just had him step up to the plate at the beginning of the first invasion of the 1000-Year Blood War arc, and it's just really great to see. In some ways, Akon feels like a conduit for the reader. He's not actually participating in the first invasion to begin with, but he's watching the devastation and the deaths unfold before his very eyes. And I really love the proactive nature of this character during this fight, and I love the way the chapter ends with him saying, "Get me in touch with Ichigo, I'll take responsibility." It's just really awesome to see a character who had barely done anything up until this point really come into his own, defy even the orders of his captain, and do his own thing because he knows it's the right thing to do. And he knows that contacting Ichigo is exactly what they should do, pride be damned. And I love that. And it doesn't stop there. Akon even attempts to break the Garganta open that has Ichigo locked inside it after he gets trapped in there, even at the risk of his own life, after the Sternritter Shaz Domino manages to knife him in the back about 3 times. But of course, his sacrifice is successful, and Ichigo manages to arrive. Akon's role from that point on is lessened a little bit, but he does still stick around. He's there when the Vandenreich transform the Soul Society, and he plays a pretty big role in Nemu's backstory. And eventually he is rewarded with a well-earned position as a vice-captain of the 12th Division at the end of the series, and truthfully, in this arc, Kubo really just lets him do his thing, and he's a badass. Like, he does more than actual vice-captains like Iba do, and I think he's definitely deserving of being on this list. He's a character who does nothing until the 1000-Year Blood War arc, and then he just becomes this reinvigorated guy who's just an absolute badass. And I remember the forum responses being very positive as well, so I think Akon definitely deserves a spot on this list. Number 6 on this list, again, might be a little controversial, and it's actually Ichigo's father, Isshin Kurosaki, or is that Isshin Shiba? Now, I know what you're thinking, and I feel the exact same way. I truly wish that Isshin had had more to do in the present timeline. However, I think Kubo more than makes up for it by giving him a fully fleshed out backstory in his own mini flashback arc, which I really believe is incredibly well written. It's here that we finally received answers to incredibly long-standing questions about Isshin's backstory, his heritage, his powers. We find out he's actually a member of the Shiba clan, and he used to be the captain of the 10th Division. Finally getting these answers really helps transform Isshin as a character into someone more fully realised. And yeah, it's a huge shame that that's basically the extent of his role in the 1000-Year Blood War arc, but I think actually seeing him as a captain is so rewarding. Everything but the Rain flashback is so well written, finding out about the relationship with Masaki and all of that sort of thing. I think it all comes together incredibly well, and it's a very satisfying read. Seeing Isshin's relationships with characters like Kisuke and Ryuken all come together and answer a bunch of questions we had about this character in one fell swoop. So yes, I'd have loved to have seen Isshin actually take part in the war proper, but I think this is enough to make him a winner. It really answered so many questions we had about him in such a satisfying way. Number 5 on our list of winners halfway through is actually Ichigo's mother, Masaki Kurosaki. The 1000-Year Blood War arc grants Masaki the ultimate gift, the gift of actually becoming a character. For so long, she was just Ichigo's dead mum, the woman who basically sacrificed herself to protect her son from Grand Fisher, and from that point on was Ichigo's driving force to want to protect all that he possibly could. But now the 1000-Year Blood War arc actually gives us Masaki not only in her prime, but so many answers to questions we didn't even know we had, but are so satisfying to receive all the same. We find out that not only was Masaki a pureblood and very skilled Quincy, but also she was the last of the Kurosaki Quincy line. The name actually comes from her. And not only that, but she's living with the Ishidas, with Ryuken Ishida and his parents. There's so much to unpack here. But what's crucial about this is that Kubo actually just makes her into a fully fledged character, something she probably deserved from the start. And Everything But the Rain is so well written, and in my opinion fairly underrated as well. Maybe it's just because it hasn't been animated yet, but it doesn't seem to be held in the same regard as Turn Back the Pendulum, but I truly believe they're both incredibly well written. The fight between Isshin and White is another reason why he's a winner on this list. It's a great battle that really showcases Isshin's power and skill as a captain, but it does a lot for Masaki as well. I love her quick thinking and the way she grabs White and headshots him with like an arrow gun. It's really, really cool, and I just think the romance story there between Isshin and Masaki is probably the best that Kubo's ever written, and I think it all comes together in a very neat and satisfying way that benefits pretty much every character involved. And now we reach the top 4 winners of the 1,000 Year Blood War arc, and I have to say that this is where the big boys are. This is where the characters who have an awful lot of screen time are residing. These are the guys who have big roles on the war and the story, pretty good character development in some cases, and just overall have a large impact on the 1,000 Year Blood War. So here is number 4. And number 4 on our list is the former captain of the 12th Division, Kisuke Urahara. Now, I love Urahara's embellished role in the 1,000 Year Blood War arc. If you were reading weekly back in the Fate Karakura Town arc, back in the Awaken Mundo arc, you will know that there was a period of time that Kisuke just wasn't in the story. He basically disappears from the moment Ichigo goes to Waco Mundo until he fights Aizen much later on. That is not the case here. Kisuke takes an active role as a on-the-battleground commander in the 1,000 Year Blood War arc pretty much from the get-go. When he goes to Waco Mundo with Ichigo and his friends, you know things are being handled differently. I love how proactive Kisuke is in this arc, and in my opinion it's one of the best and most natural showcases of his genius, but also his resourcefulness. He gets the Fullbringers to help out with the operation. He builds a makeshift base of operations in Waco Mundo to analyse the Quincy medallions, and the results of that analysis pay off in real time as he helps the Shinigami overturn the battle against the Sturmitters when it really looks like the start of the second invasion is going to go just as badly as the first one. It's Kisuke's intervention that helps them turn the tides. And Kisuke's involvement doesn't stop here, and I love having him take a more active role in the story rather than just vanishing for ages. It's great seeing him set up in Mayuri's base of operations and really taking on that role as a commander for the Shinigami. I love that a lot, and I think Kisuke is just used really, really well here. Of course, Kisuke has his battle with Askin Naklavar right at the end of the story, and we get to see his long-awaited Bankai, Kanon Biraki Benehime Aratame, and to me it hit all the right notes. You can see the video I did on his Bankai here, but as far as I'm concerned, it's a perfect Bankai for the character. And yes, the ending of the character is disappointing. I'd have loved to have seen actual closure for a character as important as Kisuke, but I think he plays a fantastic role regardless. And it's so great to see him interacting with other Shinigami again. Characters like Kyoraku, as though nothing had ever happened between them, because Kisuke has been fully accepted back into the Gotei. And number 3 on our list of 1,000 Year Blood War arc winners is actually my favourite captain, Kyoraku Shunsui. Now he's the head captain, he has taken on an enormous responsibility. The burden of the death of his father figure Yamamoto at the start of this arc really begins a chain reaction for Kyoraku that just makes him a better and better character as the arc goes on. We all know Kyoraku as being a pretty laid-back guy, happy to get drunk, party and sleep, but actually in this arc he really has to change his ways. And it's pretty interesting because I think that layer of darkness for Kyoraku has always been there, and I made a video about him as the head captain, which if you're interested in you can go and watch, but it really details how Kyoraku changes to become the leader that Soul Society needs right now. He's a new age leader capable of making the hard decisions when he needs to, such as allowing Kenpachi to learn his Shikai or freeing Aizen. These are all the kind of decisions you need to take on an enemy that is just constantly evolving, that is so powerful and so well prepared. Kyoraku is the antithesis of that. He is the one who is able to flip things on their head when they need to be. Unlike Yamamoto, who was staunchly traditional, and that does kind of get him killed, Kyoraku is ready to turn on a dime if needs be. And I love that Kyoraku's darkness is just on full view in this arc as well. He becomes a real involved member of the battle, similar again to Kisuke. He's there from the very beginning. He underestimates his opponent in the first invasion and he loses his eye. But losing that eye and gaining the eye patch is a very physical representation of the transformation he undergoes. And whether he actually transformed or if that side of him was always there and it has now surfaced is, a table for debate. But actually, Kyoraku is just handled so well in this arc, in my opinion. A multi-layered character is given even more layers here, more responsibility, and it really changes the way I think many people saw him. Not only that, but he has the battle against Leelbarrow, the leader of the Schutzstaffel up in Varvel, and I love the fight. I think it's great. I appreciate some people don't particularly like the way it ends with Nanao, and I get that a lot. But I think his Bankai, Katen, Kyokotsu, Karamatsu, Shinju, again, highly anticipated, was handled pretty well. And I just think Kyoraku's involvement in this arc, on the whole, was a huge success. And number 2 on our list of winners is truly a character that I actually think in many ways has been redefined by this arc, and that is Captain of the 11th Division Kenpachi Zaraki. Now, Kenpachi, I would wager, perhaps is the captain with the absolute most amount of screen time in this arc. He literally does so much. And his tale from the beginning of this arc to the end is a story in and of itself, which is really why I included him on here, although I did debate putting him slightly lower down for reasons we'll get into a little bit later. But Kenpachi really does undergo a transformative process in this arc. When Kyoraku allows him to learn the name of his Shikai, we learn a bit more about Kenpachi's past, his time as like this urchin child in the Rukongai, fighting and gaining a massive admiration for the character of Yachiru Unohana, who unfortunately made my losers list. But I love that backstory. I love seeing Kenpachi. I love learning about him shackling himself and then breaking free of those shackles to become the man he was supposed to be. That relationship with Unohana, I'd have loved it to be fleshed out more, but it is so good and adds another feather in Kenpachi's cap, making him a more interesting character. Of course, he then reveals his Shikai against Gremmy, and then later on his Bankai against Gerard. And I think the Shikai no Zarashi was well received among fans. It, was what you'd expect from Kenpachi. It's a big, jagged blade. But I like the tassel at the end as well. I think it adds an elegance to the inelegance, which I think actually is Kenpachi in a nutshell. I didn't expect him to get a Bankai, but I like it. It's simple and it does scream Kenpachi being a berserker, but what I like most about it is how it pays off the relationship between him and Yachiru that's been building up as the series has been going on. So I think Kenpachi really is shown so much in this arc, but it is not for nothing. He's given a good amount of development and he has his own self-contained storyline in the Thousand Year Blood War arc itself. Now, the reason I was considering putting Kenpachi slightly lower on this list is he suffers from a similar problem to Hitsugaya, and that's despite showing up a lot in the arc, it's not always good for him. And he suffers a lot of defeats in this arc and actually barely gets any wins. He obviously gets annihilated by Yuha in the first invasion. Then he uses his long-anticipated Shikai against Gremmy, but he doesn't actually kill Gremmy. Gremmy accidentally kills himself trying to imagine Kenpachi's power. Kenpachi's then ganged up on by the Bambis and again ruthlessly beaten up. At which point he then, much later on, is again beaten up by Pernida before using his Bankai against Gerard and getting beaten up. So Kenpachi does suffer a lot in this arc, and his only real win is against Unohana, but that's manufactured. It's supposed to happen, she knows it, and she's killed him a lot up until that point. But that's why I think winning fights is not everything for a character. Kenpachi gets a lot of supporting content as well, learning his Shikai, getting the relationship with Unohana, getting a little bit more backstory, learning his Bankai, all this sort of thing is so much for Kenpachi in this arc that Hitsugaya doesn't quite get, which is why he is lower on this list. So Kenpachi is number 2 as far as winners in the Thousand Year Blood War arc goes. Cool, this is quite a lengthy video, but we finally made it to number 1 on the list. The number 1 biggest winner of the Thousand Year Blood War arc, in my opinion, is the captain of the 12th Division, Mayuri Kurotsuchi. Now, Mayuri used to be defined by the fact that he was a despicable, self-serving madman, a mad scientist who was only in it for himself and didn't care about anyone else unless they got in the way of his research. Ever since then, he's been mellowing out a little bit. He transforms a little bit in the Arrancar arc, where he at least is not willing to murder other Shinigami anymore, it seems. But it's really in the Thousand Year Blood War arc that he steps up for the sake of the Seirei, and it feels like he takes his position as a captain more seriously. Now, Mayuri gets a lot of screen time in this arc, but I think it's his personality that really does him the most justice here. It's interesting because it seems like more than ever he really wants to actually help other Shinigami, even if it is begrudgingly. You see him at the start of the arc wanting the Shinigami to have waited for his analysis on the Bankai stealing process, and then much later on, he is the one who builds an actual stronghold for the Shinigami because he is able to correctly analyse that the Vandenreich use shadows to move around. So while his light suit might look absolutely ridiculous, it is also very in character for his flamboyance and eccentricity. It also has real strategic value, and I love that. I love that Mayuri, like Kisuke, takes up a commander's role. And Mayuri just seems to develop a lot in this arc. He puts his differences with Urahara aside on numerous occasions to actually work with him. The two of them discuss the Bankai stealing properties, the way the Shinyaku pills will help the Shinigami get it back. And then much later on, Mayuri doesn't even seem that mad that Kisuke has taken over his lab and actually helps them create the doorway to the royal palace. He also gets two fights. He fights Giselle and the zombified Bambietta, and then Pernida Pankajaz, and he wins both of them. The Giselle one he wins pretty handily, using resurrected Arrancar, and even fights a zombified Toshiro, and you get a real sense of how Mayuri could defeat basically any captain in this battle where he uses another of his drugs. And the fight with Pernida is more difficult for him and also quite revelatory in my opinion as well, as he realises after Nemu's death that he has succumbed to believing her to being perfect, and we get a brilliant cameo from a hallucination of Xyloporo to Mayuri that allows him to wallow a bit before getting himself together again. And it's actually an interesting parallel to Komamura. They both make these pious speeches to their opponents in the Arrancar arc, and then they both succumb to the same downfalls in the Thousand Year Blood War. But I think Mayuri is just handled so well. I love that he tries to almost be taken more seriously. That mad scientist element is still there, but now he really does do things for the sake of the Seirei, and he's willing to shoulder that burden, and he's willing to help out his fellow man. So Mayuri does loads in the final arc, and he does loads to help against the Quincy threat. At many times it feels like he's the only one who truly understands it, and so many captains don't seem to listen to him, Yamamoto in particular at the start of the arc, but Mayuri is given plenty of time to shine, sometimes quite literally. And that's our list of the top 10 biggest winners of the Thousand Year Blood War arc. I really hope you guys enjoyed it. I appreciate it's quite a long video, so I appreciate you sticking with it till the end if you did. But let me know in the comments below if you agree with my list at all, or who you might swap in and out. I'd really like to know. But again, if you haven't subscribed yet, guys, make sure to hit that button now. And until next time, I'll catch you later. See you then.